After her husband betrayed her, this chubby bakery owner stopped her car on a dark, rainy road and pulled a buried stranger out of the mud. He thanked her, disappeared by morning, and never told her who he really was. She had absolutely no idea the man she just saved was a billionaire mafia boss who was about to turn her entire life upside down. The rain had been falling since noon, and by 9 o'clock it had turned mean. Sophia wiped down the last counter, flipped the bakery sign to closed, and stood alone in the quiet for a moment. The smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar still hung in the air, the way it always did at the end of a long day. She used to love that smell. Lately, it just reminded her of how hard she was working for how little was coming back. She locked the front door of Carter's Bakery, pulled her jacket tight, and ran through the rain to her car. The drive home from Millfield took about 20 minutes on a dry night. On a night like this, with the roads slick and the tree branches whipping sideways, she gave herself 30. She turned on the radio, found nothing worth listening to, and turned it off again. She was thinking about the electric bill and the oven repair quote she'd gotten that afternoon, $412 she didn't have, and the fact that the catering order she'd been counting on for the weekend had just quietly cancelled without explanation. She was so deep in her own head that she almost missed it. A flash of something at the edge of her headlights. She slowed down. Off the right side of the road, half hidden by a row of pine trees, a dark SUV sat at a strange angle with its front end pushed into the dirt embankment alongside a construction site. No hazard lights, no one standing outside, just a crumpled vehicle in the rain and a wall of freshly moved earth that had clearly shifted sometime recently. Sophia pulled over. She told herself she'd just check, just look. If it was nothing, she'd keep going. She climbed out and walked toward the vehicle, her sneakers soaking through immediately. The SUV's windshield was cracked, the driver's door had been shoved inward by the impact, and the embankment, a tall mound of loose construction fill that had been sitting beside a drainage project, had partially collapsed across the front of the car and down along the driver's side. She leaned close to the window. Empty. She stepped back and looked at the ground. That's when she heard it. A voice. Faint, coming from somewhere beneath the earth. Her stomach dropped. She dropped to her knees right there in the mud and pressed her ear toward the collapsed bank. Rain hammered the back of her neck. "Hello?" she called out. A pause. Then, "Here. I'm here." The voice was strained, barely audible, but it was real. Sophia was already pulling out her phone. She dialed 911 and started talking the moment someone picked up. Construction collapse on Route 9 near Miller Creek. A person trapped under a dirt embankment. She could hear him. He was alive. Send someone now. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line. She did, but she was also moving, scanning the ground for where the voice had come from, talking out loud so the man underneath could hear her. "I can hear you," she said. "Help is coming. I need you to keep making noise so I know where you are." A groan, then a cough, then, "Left side, by the drain pipe." She moved left, found a section of the embankment where the soil had slumped differently, lower and looser. She got down and started scraping with her hands, not digging. She knew better than to destabilize it further, just clearing enough to confirm the direction. "I feel you moving," the voice said. "Getting closer." She talked to him the whole time the emergency services were on their way. She didn't know what else to do, so she just talked. Told him her name, told him about the bakery, told him the rain was supposed to clear by morning and the roads would be better then, so the crew would make good time getting to him. He didn't say much. He was saving his strength. But every few minutes he'd confirm he could still hear her, and she'd feel her shoulders drop half an inch with relief. When the fire truck and ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, Sophia guided them directly to the spot. The rescue crew worked fast, shoring up the surrounding soil before carefully extracting him. Sophia stepped back and watched, her clothes soaked through, her hands caked in mud. He was a tall man. That was the first thing she registered when they brought him out on the stretcher. mid-50s, silver at his temples, a deep cut above his eye. His suit, and he was wearing a suit which struck her as odd given the location, was torn and filthy. The paramedics were working quickly. One of them asked him standard questions while another checked his vitals. He turned his head. He found her face in the crowd of two, herself and a firefighter standing off to the side, and looked right at her. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, like it had been dragged over gravel. She walked a step closer. "What's your name?" He almost smiled, just slightly. "Ethan." Then his eyes closed, and the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. Sophia stood in the rain and watched the lights disappear down the road. She got back in her car, turned the heat all the way up, and sat there for a moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "I need to talk to you when you get home. I've made some decisions." She stared at the message. Something about the phrasing sat wrong. "I've made some decisions. Not we. Not can we talk. Just decisions already made." She pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later to find half the closet empty, one of the joint savings accounts drained to almost zero, and a handwritten note on the kitchen table that explained very little and apologized even less. Ryan was gone. Sophia sat down at the table in her wet clothes and read the note twice. Outside, the rain kept falling. Sophia didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table until the rain stopped, then sat there a little longer, reading Ryan's note a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. He'd written 2 short paragraphs, something about needing space, something about feeling stuck, and signed his name like it was a receipt. 7 years. That's what they'd had together, and he'd summarized the end of it in 9 sentences on a piece of notebook paper. She folded the note, put it in the kitchen drawer, and went to bed. By morning, she had made a decision of her own. She wasn't going to fall apart over a man who had already decided to leave. She had a bakery to open, bills to figure out, and, somewhere across town at Millfield General, a stranger named Ethan who had almost died in the mud the night before. She stopped by the hospital on her way to work. She told herself it was just a check, a quick visit, make sure he'd made it through the night. The nurse at the desk confirmed he was stable and in recovery. No visitors allowed yet, but she noted that Sophia was the one who had called it in and passed along the message that he was doing well. Sophia nodded, bought a bad coffee from the machine in the lobby, and drove to the bakery. She came back the following evening. This time she was allowed in. He was awake, sitting up slightly, with a bandage above his eye, and the particular look of a man who was used to being in control and deeply unhappy about being stuck in a hospital bed. He watched her walk in the way someone watches a door they weren't expecting to open. "You came back," he said. "I was in the area." She set a small paper bag on the bedside table. "Cinnamon roll, from my bakery. The nurse said you hadn't been eating much." He looked at the bag, then at her. "You bribed a nurse for my dietary information?" "I asked politely. There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. His name was Ethan. That was still all she knew. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't push. He had no family listed on his intake forms. She only knew that because the floor nurse had mentioned they were having trouble reaching an emergency contact. He'd apparently given a name and a number that went nowhere. Over the next few visits, they settled into an easy rhythm. She would stop by after closing the bakery, usually with something she'd baked that day. He would be awake, and they would talk. Not about anything heavy at first. The weather, the town, whether the hospital food was as bad as it looked. It was, he confirmed, significantly worse. He asked about the bakery on the 3rd visit. She told him more than she planned to, about how she'd opened it 4 years ago with money she'd saved since her early 20s, about how the first year had been terrifying and the second year had felt like it might actually work, about how lately the numbers weren't adding up the way she needed them to, and she wasn't sure what the next 6 months were going to look like. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. Most people, when you started talking about financial trouble, either changed the subject or offered advice they had no business giving. Ethan just listened, asked a few specific questions about her suppliers, her foot traffic, whether she'd considered catering partnerships with local event venues. Good questions, practical ones.
"You know a lot about small business," she said.
"I've been around a few," he said simply. She didn't think much of it at the time. On the 5th day, she mentioned Ryan. She hadn't planned to. It came out sideways, the way things do when you've been holding them too long. She was talking about something unrelated, and then suddenly she was saying that her husband had left, that he'd emptied part of their savings without warning, that she was managing the bakery completely alone now. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm functional," she said, "which is about the best I can say right now." "Functional is underrated," he said. She laughed. It surprised her. A real laugh, the first one in days. She hadn't expected it to come from a hospital room. He was discharged on the 7th day. Sophia stopped by that morning before her shift and found the bed already made and the room empty except for a nurse stripping the linens.
She felt a strange drop in her chest, which she immediately decided to ignore. There was an envelope at the front desk with her name on it. Inside was a handwritten note, neater than Ryan's, shorter too, just 2 lines. "Thank you for the cinnamon rolls and the conversation. Both were exactly what I needed. Ethan." No last name, no phone number, no return address. She stood in the hospital lobby, envelope in hand, and thought about how strange it was that the one person who had made her laugh this week was already gone. She tucked the note into her jacket pocket, walked out to her car, and drove to the bakery. There was dough to prep, bills to sort, and a broken oven that wasn't going to fix itself. She had work to do. 6 weeks after the night on Route 9, Sophia was behind on 3 bills and ahead on nothing. The oven repair had wiped out most of what she'd managed to set aside after Ryan cleaned out the joint account. The replacement part took 2 weeks to arrive, and during those 2 weeks, she'd lost every morning rush order she couldn't fulfill. Regular customers had drifted, a few hadn't come back. She sat at the small desk in the back office every evening after closing and went through the numbers the same way someone checks a wound, hoping it looks better than yesterday, usually finding that it doesn't. The rent on the bakery space was due in 11 days. She had about 60% of it. She'd applied for a small business loan the previous month. The bank had come back with a conditional approval that required collateral she didn't have and a cosigner she couldn't ask for. She'd thanked them and hung up and sat very still for about 5 minutes. She was not going to lose this bakery. She'd built it from scratch. She'd mixed dough at 4 in the morning before going to her day job for the first year and a half, saving every dollar she could. She'd painted those walls herself, chosen every display case, every table, every small detail that made Carter's feel like the kind of place people wanted to stay in. She was not walking away from it because of a broken oven and a man who left. So she adjusted. She cut her hours, let go of her one part-time helper, and took on every task herself. She started offering custom order pickups and posted photos on her social pages every morning. She reached out to 2 wedding planners in the county about potential catering partnerships. One didn't respond. The other said she'd keep Sophia in mind. It was exhausting, and the progress was slow, but she kept moving. Then Ryan showed up. He came on a Tuesday afternoon, which was her slowest day, as if he'd timed it deliberately. He walked in looking slightly thinner than she remembered, and with the particular expression of someone who has practiced what they want to say and is hoping the other person won't ask too many follow-up questions. "I just want to talk," he said. She was frosting a cake. She kept frosting it. "I'm listening," she said. He sat down at one of the small tables near the window and explained that things hadn't worked out the way he'd planned. The venture he'd been quietly investing in, the one he'd apparently been funneling money toward for months, including money from their account, had fallen through. He was in a difficult position. He wasn't asking to move back in. He just thought that if they could hold off on finalizing the divorce,
Give things a few months to settle. It might be easier for both of them. Sophia set down the frosting knife. "Easier for you," she said. "Sophia, you left a note, Ryan. 9 sentences." She picked the knife back up. "I don't know what kind of response you were expecting, but it wasn't this." He stayed for another 10 minutes, trying different angles. She let him talk. When he was done, she told him calmly that her lawyer would be in touch, that she wished him well with his situation, and that she had a cake to finish. He left. She finished the cake, put it in the display case, and went to the back office and sat down for exactly 4 minutes before standing up and getting back to work. She didn't have time to feel everything she was feeling. That was fine. It would keep. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. A call came in from a woman who introduced herself as an assistant coordinating a corporate catering account. She said her client had found Carter's Bakery through a local vendor recommendation and wanted to place a bulk order, pastries and specialty breads for a series of business meetings spread over the next 3 weeks. The total value of the order was just over $2,000. Sophia asked her to repeat the number. She did. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was enough to cover the rent, catch up on one of the overdue supplier invoices, and give her enough breathing room to think clearly again. The order came in exactly as promised. The client paid promptly, tipped generously on the delivery, and left a brief but glowing review on her business page under the name E. Brooks Consulting. Sophia noticed the name, filed it somewhere in the back of her mind. Then a second order came in the following week, similar size, same account. She told herself it was just good luck, a referral from somewhere, the kind of break that occasionally came around if you kept your head down and your product good. She didn't connect it to Ethan. She had no reason to. He had left no last name, no number, nothing but 2 lines on a note card. So she restocked her flour, fixed the display lighting that had been flickering for a month, paid her rent in full, and opened the bakery the next morning feeling, for the first time in weeks, like she might actually be all right. She had no idea someone was quietly making sure of it. The regional baking competition had been on Sophia's radar for almost a year. She'd filled out the application back when things were still stable, paid the entry fee, and marked the dates in her calendar with the quiet hope that by the time it arrived, she'd be in a better position than she currently was. The competition was held in Chicago every spring, drew participants from 6 states, and came with enough media coverage to genuinely move the needle for a small independent bakery. She almost didn't go. 2 weeks before the event, she sat with her budget and her calendar and told herself it was irresponsible. The travel costs, the 2 days away from the bakery, the entry materials she still needed to prep, it all added up. She had momentum now, thanks to the catering orders, but momentum was fragile and she knew it. She went anyway. She drove up on a Thursday morning with her competition pieces packed carefully in the back seat, checked into the cheapest hotel she could find within walking distance of the venue, and told herself that whatever happened, this was still a good decision. The venue was a converted event hall in the West Loop, all exposed brick and high ceilings, filled with the smell of sugar and yeast and the particular nervous energy of people who had worked very hard and were now waiting to find out if it was enough. Sophia registered, found her assigned station, and got to work setting up. The first day went well. Her sourdough scored high marks in the artisan bread category. Her judges were encouraging without being generous, which she respected more than empty praise. By the end of the first evening session, she was sitting in 3rd place overall, which was better than she'd let herself expect. She was packing up her station when she heard her name. She turned around. He was standing about 15 feet away, near the sponsor exhibition tables along the far wall. Taller than she remembered. Dressed differently. A dark jacket, no tie, nothing like the torn suit she'd last seen him in. But the face was the same. The silver at his temples. The way he looked at her, like he was genuinely glad to see her, and slightly surprised at the same time. "Ethan," she said. It came out flat, because her brain was still catching up. He walked over. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said.
I mean that. I saw your name on the participant list this morning, and I almost didn't believe it. What are you doing here? He paused, just briefly. I'm one of the event sponsors. She looked past him at the banner on the wall behind the exhibition tables. Brooks Venture Group, proud sponsor of the Midwest Artisan Food Competition. She looked back at him. Brooks, she said slowly. E. Brooks Consulting. He held her gaze and didn't say anything, which was its own kind of answer. She took a breath. Who are you, exactly? They ended up at a quiet table in the venue's side room, away from the noise of the main hall. He told her, not everything at once, but enough. His name was Ethan Brooks. He ran a private investment group that operated across real estate, logistics, and emerging markets. He had built it over 20 years from a single company his father had left him that was barely solvent at the time. The name Brooks Venture Group appeared in financial press regularly enough that most people in certain circles recognized it immediately. Sophia was not in those circles. That, he said, was part of why their conversations at the hospital had meant something to him. You talk to me like a person, he said, not like a contact, not like someone you were trying to get something from. You brought me cinnamon rolls and asked if the hospital food was as bad as it looked. It was a genuine question. I know. That's the point. She was quiet for a moment. The catering orders. Yes. You should have told me. You would have refused them. She opened her mouth and then closed it, because he was probably right, and she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of saying so out loud. He didn't press it. He just waited, the same way he'd waited through conversations at the hospital. Patient, unhurried, letting her work through it at her own pace. I'm not angry, she said finally. I just don't like not knowing things. That's fair. Over the next 4 days of the competition, they fell back into the same rhythm they'd found at the hospital, except now there was more room. They had dinner twice, walked through the West Loop on a warm evening when the day's sessions were done, and talked the way people talk when they've already skipped past the surface-level version of each other. She finished the competition in second place. Ethan was at the award presentation. He applauded with the rest of the room, and when she caught his eye across the crowd, he gave her a small nod, the kind that meant more than applause. On the drive back to Ohio, Sophia thought about the version of herself who had almost skipped this trip, who had sat with her budget and her doubts and nearly talked herself out of going. She was glad she hadn't listened to that version. Something had shifted. She wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but she could feel it clearly enough. That was enough for now. Sophia had never been particularly interested in the business world. She read recipes the way other people read novels, subscribed to 2 food industry newsletters, and occasionally skimmed the local paper for anything relevant to small retail. That was the extent of it. She had never had reason to pay attention to investment groups or corporate restructuring or the kind of financial news that lived behind paywalls and used words like hostile acquisition and executive displacement. But she found herself paying attention now. The drive back from Chicago had given her too much time to think. She knew Ethan's last name, she knew the name of his company, and she had a phone with a search engine. By the time she was back in Millfield, she had read enough to understand that the man who had eaten her cinnamon rolls in a hospital bed was considerably more significant than his bedside manner had suggested. Brooks Venture Group had holdings across 11 states. It employed thousands of people through subsidiary companies in logistics, commercial real estate, and private manufacturing. Ethan had built most of it himself over 2 decades, starting with a struggling freight company his father had left him and expanding methodically, deal by deal, into something that financial journalists described with phrases like quietly dominant and deliberately low profile. That last part tracked. She could see it in him. What she hadn't expected to find were the other stories. Buried further down in her searching, past the press releases and the profile pieces, were murkier accounts. Industry forums and financial blogs speculating about the nature of some of Brooks Venture Group's earlier partnerships.
References to associates from Ethan's first decade in business who had operated in ways that weren't always clean. Nothing proven, nothing that had ever become a formal legal matter. But the pattern of names that appeared alongside his in those early years told a story that the official biography left out. She closed her laptop and sat with that for a while. The next time Ethan called, he'd given her his number before she left Chicago. She didn't bring it up immediately. They talked about the competition, about the second-place finish, about a bread supplier she'd mentioned wanting to switch to. Normal conversation. Easy. Then she said, "I looked you up." A pause on his end. "I figured you would." "I read some things that weren't in the press releases." Another pause, longer this time. "Can we talk about it in person?" he said. He drove to Millfield the following weekend. They sat in the back corner of the bakery after closing, with 2 cups of coffee and the low hum of the refrigeration units the only sound in the room. He didn't make her drag it out of him. He started talking, and he kept going until he'd said what he needed to say. In his early years, building the company from nothing, he had accepted partnerships he shouldn't have. People with money who asked few questions expected the same in return. He hadn't done anything criminal. He was careful and precise about that distinction. But he had been in rooms he shouldn't have been in, and had looked the other way at things he should have confronted. By the time he had enough standing to walk away from those associations, he did. Cleanly, deliberately, and at significant financial cost. He had spent the 15 years since building something he could actually be proud of. The accident wasn't an accident, he said then, and Sophia set down her coffee cup. She waited. The night on Route 9, he explained. He had been traveling back from a meeting in Columbus. 3 senior executives within his own organization, men he had trusted for years, had been quietly working to strip key assets from the company while positioning themselves to take control during what they'd planned as his forced absence. They had arranged for his vehicle to be run off the road by staging a construction obstruction that would look like an accident. The embankment collapse was supposed to be worse than it was. He was supposed to be unreachable for long enough that certain transfers and board motions could be pushed through without him. He had survived because the timing was off and because a woman in a bakery jacket had stopped her car in the rain. Sophia sat very still. "You knew all of this," she said. "While you were in the hospital." "I knew enough." "And you didn't tell me." "You were a stranger who had just saved my life," he said. "I wasn't going to pull you into it." She understood that. She didn't entirely like it, but she understood it.
"Where are they now?" she asked. "The 3 executives. Still inside the company, still operating as if nothing happened." He turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. "I came back quietly. They don't know how much I know yet. I've been rebuilding my position from the inside, pulling together documentation, getting the right people in the right places before I move." "That sounds like it takes patience." "It takes everything," he said. She looked at him across the table, the silver at his temples, the steadiness in his expression that she now understood had been earned through things she was only beginning to grasp. She thought about what it meant that he'd told her all of this. It wasn't a small thing. A man who had spent decades being carefully private didn't share something like this unless he'd decided, deliberately, that the person across the table was worth the risk. She picked up her coffee cup. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right?" "I'm not running," she said. "I just wanted you to know that." Outside, the evening settled quietly over Millfield. Inside, something between them shifted into place, carefully, the way things do when both people finally decide to stop pretending they haven't noticed it. The invitation came on a Wednesday morning, slipped into a phone call that had started as a routine check-in. Ethan had been calling every few days since his visit to Millfield. Never long calls. He wasn't the kind of person who filled silence just to fill it, but consistent ones. He'd ask about the bakery, she'd ask about the situation with his company, and they'd talk until one of them had somewhere to be.
It had become a rhythm she'd stopped pretending she didn't look forward to.
"I want to show you something in New York," he said that Wednesday. "A space. A few spaces, actually. I think you should see them before I explain the rest." "What kind of spaces?" "Bakery-sized ones." She was quiet for a moment. "Ethan, I know what you're going to say." "I don't think you do." "You're going to say it's too much, too fast, and that you don't want to be someone's project." She had been about to say exactly that. "Give me 4 days," he said. "Flights, hotel, everything handled. You look at what I'm proposing, and if it doesn't make sense to you, we don't talk about it again." She looked around the bakery, the repaired oven, the display case she'd rearranged twice this month, trying to make it look fuller than it was, the hand-lettered menu board she'd done herself with a brush pen and 3 attempts. 4 days, she said. New York arrived the way it always did for people who didn't live there, loud and immediate, with no warm-up period. Sophia had been once before, years ago, and had spent most of it overwhelmed. This time, she was too focused to be overwhelmed. Ethan met her at the hotel. He looked different in the city. Same person, but in his natural element, in a way he hadn't quite been in Millfield or even Chicago. He moved through the streets with the ease of someone who had spent years learning exactly how much space he needed to take up in any given room. The first space he showed her was in the West Village. Ground floor of a restored building, wide front windows, original hardwood floors, a kitchen layout in the back that had been used by a catering company for 6 years before they'd relocated. It smelled like old wood and potential. Sophia walked through it slowly, measuring with her eyes the way she'd learned to do when she first looked at the Millfield space years ago. "How many of these do you have?" she asked. 3 in the city. 2 more in markets I think you'd do well in. 1 in Philadelphia, 1 in Cleveland. She turned to face him. "You've been planning this for a while." "Since Chicago," he said. "Maybe a little before." He laid it out over dinner that evening. The proposal was straightforward, which she appreciated. He would provide the capital and the real estate infrastructure. She would provide the brand, the recipes, the operational model, and her name above the door. Carter's Bakery expanded. Not a franchise in the way people usually meant that word. No diluted product, no central factory supply chain. Each location would be run as its own kitchen, trained to her standards, using her methods. She would retain creative control completely. He would take a minority equity stake and recoup his investment over time through revenue sharing, structured in a way that never put her in a position of owing more than the business could carry. She had questions, detailed ones. She asked them, and he answered every single one without deflecting, without vague reassurances, without telling her not to worry about the specifics. He pulled up actual documents on his phone when she asked about terms. She read them at the table while he finished his food. "You came prepared," she said. "I came respectful," he said. "There's a difference." She almost smiled. Over the next 3 days, she visited all 3 city spaces. She met 2 members of his development team who walked her through build-out timelines and local permit processes. She tasted coffee at the cafe next door to the West Village location and decided she liked the neighborhood. She stood in the Cleveland space, a warm corner unit in a mixed-use building near a university, and thought about what it would mean to walk away from the version of herself that was always 1 bad month away from collapse. It was on the 3rd day that the first sign of trouble appeared. She was with Ethan at a meeting with a potential kitchen equipment supplier when his phone buzzed repeatedly. He excused himself and stepped out. When he came back, something had shifted in his expression, contained but different. He told her later. A story had appeared in a financial industry newsletter. Anonymous sourcing, thin on specifics, heavy on implication. It suggested that Brooks Venture Group was in deeper internal disarray than previously known, and referenced a new business partner whose background and qualifications were being questioned by people inside the company. They didn't use Sophia's name. They didn't need to. Anyone paying attention to Ethan's recent movements could connect it. "This is them," Ethan said. The executives. They're shifting tactics. They're coming after my credibility, Sophia said. They're trying to make the expansion look like poor judgment on my part. If they can make you look like a liability, they make me look unstable. She sat with that. She had walked into this city 4 days ago as a woman with one small bakery and an uncertain future. Now she was being used as a pressure point by people who had tried to bury the man sitting across from her, literally, and hadn't finished what they started. She looked at Ethan. "So what do we do?" she asked. He looked back at her steadily. "We don't flinch," he said. The newsletter piece was just the beginning. Within a week of its publication, 2 more stories appeared, one in a regional business journal, one on a financial commentary site that Sophia had never heard of, but apparently a lot of investors had. Both referenced anonymous sources inside Brooks Venture Group. Both painted the same picture: a CEO making erratic decisions, surrounding himself with unvetted outsiders, and losing the confidence of his senior leadership team. Neither piece mentioned Sophia by name, but both referenced the bakery expansion project in enough detail that anyone who wanted to find her could. The calls started after that. Journalists, mostly. A few left voicemails asking for comment. One showed up at Carter's bakery on a Thursday afternoon and sat at a table for 40 minutes nursing a coffee before introducing himself and asking if she had anything to say about her business relationship with Ethan Brooks. She said she was happy to discuss Carter's bakery, its menu, and its upcoming catering availability. Anything else, she referred to her lawyer. She didn't have a lawyer. She called one that evening. Ethan had offered to cover legal costs, and she had declined. She was already reconsidering that. The harder part wasn't the journalists, it was the investors. 2 of the regional partners who had expressed interest in the bakery expansion quietly backed away. No formal withdrawal, no confrontational conversation, just emails that grew slower, then stopped. One development contact told her directly, apologetically, that they needed to see things stabilize before they could commit. She thanked him and hung up and stared at the wall for a while. She was not going to let this bury her. But she was honest enough with herself to admit it was costing her. Ethan called every evening during that stretch. He didn't minimize what was happening or tell her it would pass quickly, because they both knew it might not. Instead, he updated her on where things stood, which records his internal team had secured, which board members he'd had direct conversations with, what the legal process for removing the executives looked like, and how long it was likely to take. He was methodical about it, careful. She could hear the exhaustion underneath the steadiness, but he never led with it. "You don't have to keep me updated on every detail," she told him one evening. "Yes, I do," he said. "You're in this because of me. The least I can give you is information." She didn't argue. Then Ryan came back. She should have seen it coming. He had a particular instinct for timing that had never served either of them well. He showed up on a Saturday morning when the bakery was quiet, looking more pulled together than his last visit, as if he'd prepared this time. He had read the articles. He sat across from her and said he was worried, that she was getting tangled up in something bigger than she understood, that Ethan Brooks wasn't the kind of person she should be building a future around. He used the word dangerous twice and the phrase your best interest 3 times, and at no point acknowledged that he had left her with a half-empty bank account and a note on the kitchen table. Sophia let him finish. "Ryan," she said, "I need you to hear this clearly because I'm only going to say it once." He straightened slightly, as if he expected a negotiation. "I'm not angry at you anymore," she said. "I was for a while, but I'm not now. What I am is done. The divorce is moving forward, the lawyers are handling it, and nothing that's happening in my life right now has any space in it for this conversation." "Sophia, I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." She stood up and picked up the tray she'd been restocking. "I'm saying something different. I'm saying goodbye, Ryan. For real this time." He left.
She finished restocking the display case and then went to the back office and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of sitting quietly before she got back to work. She had learned over the past several months how to feel things without letting them take the wheel. It was not a skill she'd had before all this started. She had built it the same way she'd built everything else, one day at a time, out of necessity. Meanwhile, Ethan's internal investigation was moving faster than the executives had anticipated. The key had been the financial records from the period surrounding the accident, the night on Route 9. In the days before and after, certain asset transfers had been initiated that, when traced carefully, pointed directly to the 3 men at the center of it. Digital records, communication logs, a chain of authorization signatures that told a clear story once someone was looking at them from the right angle. The board had been shown the first round of documentation 2 weeks earlier. 2 of the 5 members had shifted their position immediately. A third was close. Ethan didn't celebrate any of it. He just kept working. One evening, he told Sophia that the thing he found strangest about all of it wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how long it had been building beneath the surface, while everything looked normal from the outside. "That's the part that stays with you," he said, "wondering what else you weren't seeing." Sophia thought about Ryan, about 7 years of small signs she'd explained away. "Yeah," she said, "I know that feeling." They were quiet on the line for a moment. "We're going to get through this," he said, not as a reassurance, more like a statement of fact from someone who had measured the distance and was prepared to walk it. "I know," she said, and she meant it. The board vote happened on a Tuesday morning in November. Sophia was in the bakery when Ethan called. She was elbow-deep in a custom order, a 3-tier celebration cake for a retirement party, and almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her pick up. "It's done," he said. She set down the piping bag. All 3 executives had been formally removed from their positions. The board had voted unanimously in the end. Even the 2 members who had taken the longest to come around had seen enough in the final documentation to leave no room for doubt. Legal proceedings were being handed to outside counsel. Asset transfers that had been initiated during Ethan's disappearance were being reversed through the courts. It had taken 4 months of careful, grinding work. No dramatic confrontations, no public spectacle, just documentation, patience, and the kind of quiet persistence that doesn't make for exciting stories, but wins in the end. "How do you feel?" Sophia asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Like I can breathe again." She understood that completely. The weeks that followed moved differently. The pressure that had been sitting on both of them, the articles, the investor hesitation, the constant low hum of someone else trying to control the narrative, lifted gradually, the way weather changes. Not all at once, but noticeably. The false stories lost their momentum once it became clear their sources had been removed from the company. 2 journalists published follow-up pieces that walked back the earlier implications without quite apologizing for them. The financial commentary site quietly took down its article altogether. Sophia's lawyer sent a letter. Nothing more was needed. The investors came back. Not all of them, and not immediately. But the development contact who had apologized and gone quiet called Sophia in early December with a straightforward question. Was the expansion still moving forward? She told him yes. He said he was in. By the end of the month, 2 of the 3 New York spaces were in active build-out. The West Village location, the one with the wide front windows and the hardwood floors, was scheduled to open in March. The Cleveland space was 3 weeks behind it. Sophia drove to New York twice in January to oversee the kitchen installations. She stood in the West Village space on a cold afternoon with sawdust on the floor and plastic sheeting over the windows and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Something quieter and more solid than relief. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ethan met her there on the second trip. They walked through both spaces together, and she explained what she was changing from the original layout plans and why. He listened and asked practical questions and deferred to her judgment on everything that touched the kitchen and the customer experience, which was everything that mattered.
At one point, the contractor asked Ethan a question about the exterior signage, and Ethan said, without hesitating, "That's her call." It was a small thing. She noticed it anyway. In February, they drove together through Ohio, Illinois, and into Pennsylvania, visiting potential sites for the next phase of the expansion. It was a working trip, early mornings, long drives, back-to-back meetings with local property managers and kitchen consultants. They ate at diners and gas station coffee, and once, memorably, a very good bowl of soup from a place with no sign that Ethan somehow knew about. She asked him how he knew about it. "I've been doing this a long time," he said. "You learn where the good soup is." She laughed. He looked pleased with himself in the careful way he had, like he'd aimed for that exact reaction and was too composed to admit it. The evenings on that trip were different from the days. Work stopped, the laptops closed, and they talked the way they had in the hospital and in the back of the bakery after hours, without agenda, without the next item on the list waiting. He told her about his father, the freight company, the early years of building something from almost nothing. She told him about her grandmother's kitchen, where she had first learned that food was a way of taking care of people, and how that had never left her. They were somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, parked outside a property they'd looked at that afternoon, when he said quietly, "I don't think I'd have gotten through the last year the same way without you in it." She looked out the windshield at the dark road ahead. "You would have managed," she said. "Probably," he said, "but managing isn't the same thing." She didn't answer right away. She let the words settle. They had both come through something. His betrayal had been corporate, calculated, years in the making. Hers had been personal, delivered in 9 sentences on notebook paper. The details were different, but the damage had the same shape. The particular kind that comes from trusting someone completely and finding out the trust was not returned. They had rebuilt themselves through work, through stubbornness, through showing up every day, even when the numbers were bad and the stories were false and the people they'd counted on were gone. And somewhere in the middle of all that rebuilding, without either of them making a formal announcement about it, they had rebuilt something together, too. She turned to look at him. "I know," she said simply. It was enough. He understood what she meant the same way he had always understood her, without requiring her to say more than she was ready to say. Outside, Pennsylvania stretched dark and quiet in every direction. Inside the car, it was warm, and neither of them was in a hurry to start driving again. Ethan had kept the detail a secret for 3 weeks. Sophia only found out when he called on a Friday evening in late March and told her to clear her Sunday. She asked why. He said to trust him. She said that wasn't an answer. He said it was the only one she was getting. She cleared her Sunday. He picked her up at 7 in the morning, which she noted was an unreasonable hour for a surprise, and drove them south out of the city. She recognized the route within 20 minutes but said nothing, just watched the landscape shift from suburban sprawl to open fields to the kind of quiet rural Ohio she had grown up around and never quite been able to leave. He pulled off Route 9. She had driven this road hundreds of times in the past year, and she had never once stopped at this particular stretch. She had told herself it was because there was nothing to stop for. Looking at it now, in the clear light of a March morning, she understood it was because stopping meant remembering, and for a long time, remembering hurt. He parked and they got out. The construction site was gone. The embankment had been properly graded and seeded, and early spring grass was already coming through in patches. The drainage project had been completed months ago. There was no trace of the collapsed earth or the crumpled SUV or the rain-soaked chaos of that November night. Just a quiet road. Trees still bare at the tips, but starting to bud. Morning light coming in flat and clean across the fields. "I used to avoid this stretch," she said. "I know," he said. "I used to drive past it on purpose." She looked at him. "Trying to remember what it felt like," he said. "Lying under there, hearing your voice. I didn't want to forget that. What it felt like to have a stranger decide your life was worth stopping for.
She was quiet for a moment.
It was raining, she said. I almost didn't get out of the car.
I know. You told me. In the hospital, the second visit. He paused. I've thought about that a lot, that you almost didn't. The morning was cold enough that their breath showed. Somewhere in the trees behind them, a bird was working through the same 3 notes repeatedly, unhurried. She had thought about it too, the version of that night where she kept driving, where she turned up the heat, stayed in her lane, got home to find Ryan's note, and never heard a voice calling from beneath the earth. She had let herself think about that version exactly once and then put it away. Some things were not useful to dwell on. They drove from Route 9 to Millfield, and when they turned onto her street, she saw the bakery from a distance and felt the now familiar combination of pride and disbelief that still caught her off guard sometimes. Carter's bakery looked good, better than good. The exterior had been repainted in the fall, a warm cream with dark green trim that had been her grandmother's favorite combination, and the new signage was clean and well lit even in daylight. Inside, it was already open. Her morning staff had it running. The smell hit her the moment the door swung wide. Cinnamon and yeast and the particular warmth that came from an oven that had been going since 5. It was a Sunday, which had become their best day. Every table was full. Ethan stood beside her just inside the doorway and looked at the room with the expression of a man seeing something he'd hoped for and wasn't entirely sure he'd get to see. She recognized the expression because she'd worn it herself, standing in the West Village space on opening day 2 weeks earlier, watching the line form down the block before they'd even unlocked the door. They sat at the corner table, her table, the one she always took when she needed to think, and her staff brought coffee without being asked, which she appreciated. "I want to say something," Ethan said. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "All right?" He took his time. He had always taken his time with the things that mattered, which was something she had come to count on. "A year ago, I was under a dirt embankment on a road in the rain," he said, "and everything I had built was being taken apart by people I had trusted. And the thing that I remember most clearly from that night, from lying there, waiting, was deciding that if I got out, I was going to stop living like proximity to the wrong people was the price of success." She listened. "You showed me something different," he said. "Not on purpose, just by being what you are. Someone who builds things carefully and treats people well and doesn't cut corners on the things that matter." "I cut corners on the display lighting for about 3 months," she said. He almost smiled. "I know, I noticed." She looked at him across the small table, the silver at his temples, the steadiness that she understood now had been built from harder material than it looked. Outside the bakery window, Millfield was doing what it did on a Sunday morning. Slow and unhurried, people walking dogs, a couple pushing a stroller, a man reading a newspaper in a parked car. Ordinary life, moving at its own pace. She had almost lost all of this. The bakery, the town, the sense of herself as someone capable of building something worth keeping. She hadn't. And sitting here now, with the coffee warm in her hands and the room full around her, and the long road of the past year finally settling into something she could look at without flinching, she understood that what came next was not a rescue or a restart. It was a choice. Her choice. Made clearly, with full information, by a woman who had learned the hard way what she was worth, and had decided, quietly and without fanfare, to stop accepting anything less. She looked at Ethan. "What are we doing next?" she asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a small folded paper on the table between them. She opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn map, rough, clearly done by him, marking 5 cities with small squares that could only be bakery locations. 3 she recognized. 2 were new. She looked up. "Philadelphia and Denver," he said. if you want them. She looked at the map for a long moment.
Then she folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket, right where she had once kept a 2-line note card from a man she thought she'd never see again.
I want them, she said. Outside, the morning moved on. Inside Carter's bakery, something new was beginning, built on the kind of foundation that holds because it was put together honestly, from the ground up, by two people who both knew exactly what it cost to build something worth keeping.